So in the last part, we had discussed till the articulations of lumbar area. So from now onwards, we'll start with the intervertebral disc. So as I mentioned in the last few videos, lumbar will be also having the more mobile joint. So in this area, so the intervertebral disc of lumbar area, which differs from the disc of the cervical region, in that the collagen fiber of the annulus fibras arranged in a sheet called as lamella. So the lamellae are arranged in the concentric ring that surrounds the nucleus. Nucleus, I told, in the intervertebral disc, nucleus will be there, that is surrounded by the lamellae are surrounded by the nucleus. The collagen fiber in the adjacent rings are oriented in the opposite direction at 120 degree to each other. Advantage of varying fiber orientation by the layer is that the annulus fibrous is able to resist the tensile force in nearly all direction. So tensile force, you just have to make sure, just wind up the first chapter and just make sure what do you mean by the tensile force. The lumbar intervertebral discs are largest in the body, and shape of each disc is not purely elliptical but is concave posteriorly. This provides a greater cross-section area of annulus fibrous posteriorly and meniscoid structure. So advantage of this, it is the largest in the all vertebra, which is just because the lumbar area have to bear more weight than any other areas. If we are comparing with the cervical, thoracic and lumbar area have to bear more weight. So the lumbar areas disc are largest in its structure. So joint capsule are more lax than those in the thoracic region, but more taut than those in the cervical region, which means it will provide more movement than the thoracic area, but comparatively lesser movement than in the cervical region. The dorsal capsule has been demonstrated to be fibrocartilaginous, which suggests that the portion of the capsule is subjected to compressive as well as tensile force. So this area will be subject to the compressive and tensile force. In a newborn, the zygapophyseal joint in the lumbar region lie predominantly in the frontal plane in presence of lumbar kyphosis. As the children develop and assumes an upright posture, the curve of the lumbar region changes to lordosis and the orientation of the zygapophyseal changes as well. These are the point I was specifically mentioning in the last classes. As I was explaining, first the child will be having primary curve. So when a newborn is lumbar lies predominantly in the frontal plane in the presence of lumbar kyphosis, at first we will be having a kyphotic posture, anterior, this is posterior, this is a kyphotic posture. First of all, we will be having a primary curve, that is kyphotic posture throughout the body, throughout the vertebra when you are getting a newborn. So once the child assumes an upright posture, when the child stands up and the curve of the lumbar area changes to lordosis orientation, because of the load which is occurring or which is getting on the lumbar area, the lumbar area which changes to lordosis, that is secondary curve. Secondary curve occurs like that because of the weight distribution over the lumbar area. So the orientation of the adult lumbar zygapophyseal joint display great variability both between the individual and within the individual. However, the majority of these joints have a curved structure that is bipolar in orientation. So the anterior aspect of each joint remains in the frontal plane and posterior aspect lies close to the sagittal plane. So this function have a role with the flexion and extension that will be coming in the next few slides. The degree to which it happens vary. The frontal plane orientation provides a resistance to the anterior shear that is present in the lordotic lumbar region. The sagittal plane orientation allows a greater range of flexion and extension motion and provide resistance to the rotation. So this sagittal plane movement will be allowing greater flexion extension. We'll be discussing in the kinematics in the coming slides. Now we'll discuss about the ligaments and fascia. So do you think what will be the role of ligaments and fascia in the lumbar area? As I had mentioned, the roles of lumbar, major, functions of the lumbar area, that is movement and weight bearing. So I'll discuss in the coming slides, because we have to discuss about the thoracolumbar fascia and the other ligaments also. I'll be discussing in the next slides. The majority of ligaments associated with the lumbar area are same ligaments described previously, like in the thoracic area as well as in the cervical area, like ligamentum flavum, posterior longitudinal ligament, anterior longitudinal ligament, interspinous ligament and supraspinous ligament, as well as the joint capsules. So however, a few of these ligaments have variations specific to lumbar region and need to be mentioned here before the iliolumbar ligaments and thoracolumbar fascia. So the supraspinous ligament is well developed only in the upper lumbar region and may terminate at the L3, although the most common termination site appears to be at the L4, because L2, L1 to L4 it is almost having the same features, but L5, from L5 onwards it will be showing the property of S1. The ligament is always absent at the L5 S1. That ligament is almost always absent at the L5 S1, just because S1 means sacrum 1. Sacrum is having a function. It's like S1 to sacrum, all the bones are fused together. So what will happen? L5 is also having almost similar features like sacrum. So when it is coming towards the L5 S1, the ligaments is always absent. There is not required, because it's almost fused in the sacral area. It's not almost, it is fused. The deep layer of supraspinous ligament is reinforced by the tendinous fiber of the multifidus muscle. The middle fiber of the supraspinous ligament blend with the dorsal layer of the thoracolumbar fascia. So thoracolumbar fascia will be coming in the next slide. The intertransverse ligament are not truly ligament in the lumbar area and are replaced by the iliolumbar ligament at L5. The posterior longitudinal ligament is only a thin ribbon in the lumbar region, whereas the ligamentum flavum is thick. So they conducted a study on 132 spine ligaments. The Pinder and associate found that interspinous ligament had a least overall stiffness and joint capsule have the highest. The anterior longitudinal ligament is strong and well developed in this region. So we'll come to the iliolumbar ligaments. It consists of a series of bands that extend from the tips and border of the transverse process of the L5 to attach bilaterally on the iliac crest of the pelvis. So even pelvis have a role with the lumbar area, that also will be explaining. The ventral or anterior band which runs from the ventral caudal aspect of the transverse process of L5 to ventral surface of the iliac crest. Iliac crest is situated in the iliac pelvis area. The dorsal or the posterior band which runs from the tip of the transverse process of the L5 to more clinical part of the iliac crest. So these iliolumbar ligaments are very strong and which plays an extra role in the preventing the anterior translation of L5 on S1, and it will also prevent resisting the flexion, extension, axial rotation and lateral bending, especially on the L5 on the S1. So these ligaments will have a maximal load on the lumbosacral junction in the absence of muscle protection against flexion. For example, if you are sitting, this is an upright posture for sitting. I'll keep the chair here. For example, if you are sitting, it is an upright posture. Here, if you are focusing on any of the muscles, all the muscles will be relaxed, especially including the hands. Here we have a arm pad So we can rest the hand over it and we'll be sitting relaxedly. So just imagine if you are watching the movie for several hours and gradually our posture will be going like this. So it will be a slouched posture, it will become a slouch posture. So when it is becoming a slouch posture, it can have a extra effort or extra resistance over this area, and in this area there are more chances the lumbar area can get injured. So when sitting in a relaxed slouch posture, this ligament can be source of a low back pain when the subject to the creep-in position because of the slouch posture. We'll be ideally sitting like this as I explained right now. But if our posture had changed to like this on a chair, what happens is in this area most of the times it can lead to a low back pain because of the excessive stress, because our upright posture should be like this. If this is a chair, our upright posture should be like this, and I explained right now with the demonstration. So in this all the muscles will be relaxed due to the external support, whatever it's the support. So here what happens is, if this is the chair and if you are slouching your body like this, in this space, that is from the body to the chair, there is no support for the lumbar area or for the lower back area. So what happens is, most of the time internal muscles have to work. Internal muscles in sense, internal force as well as external force are there. If you are sitting in an upright chair, for whatever I have explained, external force from the chair or external support from the chair will be helping our body if you are sitting in an upright posture. But if you slouch like this, the internal structures have to compensate. Internal structures in the sense our muscles have to compensate more in order to prevent from further injury. So if these muscles are getting activated more, for a strenuous time, for more than hours you may be sitting. Actually this is a bad posture. That is why our parents will be telling we have to sit straight. So this is the area where most of the times the young individual will be getting low back pain. So this is the thoracolumbar fascia. It is consisting of the posterior, middle and anterior layer. The posterior layer is thick and the fibrous arise from the spinous process and the spinous ligaments of the thoracic, lumbar and sacral spine. It will be till here. The posterior layer give rise to latissimus dorsi, cranially, and it is continuously cranially with the inferior tendinous border of the splenius capitis and lower fibers of the splenius cervicis. So the posterior layer travels caudally to the sacrum and ilium and blends with the fascia of the contralateral gluteus maximus. See here, it is traveling like this and it is getting a kind of blended with the contralateral gluteus maximus. See here, the fibers are coming like this and it is getting blended with the contralateral gluteus maximus. So, and deep fibers are connected to the sacrotuberous ligament and connected to the posterior superior iliac spine, iliac crest and long posterior sacroiliac ligament. So, the posterior layer also travels laterally over the erecta spinae muscles and forms the lateral raphe and lateral aspect of the erecta spinae. So, the internal abdominal oblique and the transverse abdominal muscles arise from the lateral raphe. So, as I explained, the function of the anterior part is to prevent the opposite movement, or which have to restrict the opposite movement. So, anterior structure like abdomen's function is to prevent further extension, and the thoracolumbar fascia, the function will be to prevent further flexion. It have to control it. So for that, it should be little tight in order to make sure the stability is maintained. The posterior layer becomes with the middle layer and travels medially again along with the anterior surface of the erector spinae and attaches back to the transverse process and intertransverse ligament of the lumbar spine. These two layers completely surround the lumbar extensor muscle group. The anterior layer of the thoracolumbar fascia is derived from the fascia of the quadratus lumborum muscle, where it joins the middle layer and inserts into the transverse process of the lumbar spine and blends with the intertransverse ligament. For example, see the thoracic the posterior structures. What is their action is to prevent further bending of the cervical spine. If this is a cervical spine, if it is going towards a flexion, these muscles have to elongate and restrict the movement. Function of this erector spine, the posterior muscle, is to elongate further and to avoid unwanted movements. So as I explained, anterior structure have to come get shortened when it is going down, and the posterior muscle have to elongate. So McGill described the fascia as stabilizing the corset that forms a hoop around the abdomen along the abdominal muscles and their fascia. And Barker and colleagues support McGill's notion that lumbar fascia acts as stabilizing corset by demonstrating that fascia increases the spinal stiffness. That's what I was explaining. It had to be little tight in order to make sure lumbar areas stability have to maintain. So I'll give you another example. If you are standing straight and if you bend, for example, I am giving an arch, a mild arch over here, and I am partially bending the knee. If you go in front and if you come back, I am repeating the movement. Do you have an idea which muscles will be working more? It's almost the same feature, but I had given an arch over here. So which muscles will be working more? When I am discussing concentrically, anterior structure had to work concentrically and the posterior structure had to work either elongation or eccentrical contraction. It is eccentrical contraction, it is just because it is going towards the gravity, an external force. So the thoracolumbar fascia also have the role to prevent further flexion. This is what we call as deadlift. The hamstring will be working more. It is eccentric contraction of the hamstring along with the eccentric contraction of the posterior muscle, and while coming back it should be the concentric contraction. So Grekovetsky designated the anterior layer of the thoracolumbar fascia as a passive part and the posterior layer as the active part. So according to him, the passive part serves to transfer the tension produced by the contraction of the hip extensor to the spinous process. That's what I explained with the deadlift. The active portion is activated by the contraction of the transverse abdominis muscle, which tightens the fascia. The fascia transfers the tension longitudinally to the tips of the spinous process of L1 bar L4 and may help the spinal extensor muscle to resist an applied load. The same, whatever I had explained practically, that they had explained in the theoretical form. Vleeming found that both the gluteus maximus and the contralateral latissimus dorsi tense the superficial layer and provided the pathway for mechanical transmission of forces between the pelvis and trunk. That is just because, see, latissimus dorsi is coming like this. And as you know, thoracolumbar fascia, it is blending with the opposite gluteus maximus. So one side gluteus maximus will be working and the contralateral latissimus dorsi also have to work together. So this is the thoracolumbar fascia. See here. See, thoracolumbar fascia, it is assigned like this. is the gluteus maximus. So latissimus dorsi also will be having a mild role. So it will blend with the gluteus maximus in the contralateral. If this is the right side, if the right side latissimus dorsi is coming, it have to blend with the left side gluteus maximus, as vice versa with the left side latissimus dorsi. Now we'll discuss the function of the lumbar region. Mainly it will be having the kinematics like flexion, extension, lateral bending and rotation. These are the images for forward bending, extension, lateral bending and rotation. So the lumbar zygapophyseal facet favors the flexion and extension because of the predominant sagittal plane orientation. As we were discussing the disc, I had mentioned this point. I told it will be coming in the function. The amount of flexion varies at each interspace of the lumbar vertebra, but most of the flexion take place at the lumbosacral joint. Lateral flexion and rotation are more free in the upper lumbar region and progressively diminish in the lower region because the L5 is approximately fused. The further movement won't happen in the L4, L5 region. The largest lateral flexion region occurs in the L2 and L3. The motion in the region, that is L5S1, is limited because of the shape of the zygapophyseal joint, and also it is blended with the L5 is almost similar to the sacral vertebrae. When the medial orientation of the joint surface is greater, the resistance to the axial rotation is greater, and the total amount of the lumbar motion from a neutral lordotic position is reported to be as follows, that is flexion 52 degree, lateral flexion 30 degree to each side and rotation 32 degree. So in the lumbar region, coupled motion which usually occurs at the lateral flexion and the axial rotation. The pattern of coupled motion, however, appears to be inconsistent. The Legaspi and Edmond recently performed a critical review to determine if a consistent pattern of coupling exists in the literature. Of 24 articles, he reviewed that there was a small agreement about the specific character of coupled motion in the lumbar spine. Now this Nelson and co-workers studied on 30 healthy individuals, on healthy women aging from 19 to 35 who lifted and replaced a 9.5 kg weight on the floor, and they found that the lumbar and the pelvic motion were variable among these individuals, which means individual to individual it will be varying. So if I will be having some movement in the lumbar flexion, in the same way, for example, if I am doing a lumbar flexion, automatically pelvis also have to not compensate, also have to contribute. That is what we call as lumbopelvic rhythm, that we will be discussing in the coming slides. So variable among individuals and tended to occur simultaneously during the trunk flexion and more frequently during the trunk extension. So McGill reported that he and his colleague had never seen this strict sequence described by the Calliot in any case of vast number of studies that they had done. So there is no argument, however, the integration of the motion of the pelvis about the hip joint with the motion of the vertebral column not only increases the motion available on the total column but also reduces the amount of the flexibility required for the lumbar region. So McGill suggested that eliminate the need for full lumbar extension, which would serve a protective function by protecting the annulus fibrous and posterior ligaments from being fully lengthened because of the anterior structure. The contribution to this motion from the multiple areas to provide a larger area of motion that could be accomplished by a single area, which is similar to what is found at the shoulder in the scapulohumeral rhythm. So it's almost similar like a scapulohumeral rhythm, that is lumbopelvic rhythm, which is almost similar to the scapulohumeral rhythm. A restriction of motion at either lumbar spine or the hip joint may distribute the rhythm and prevent a person from reaching the toes. For example, sit and reach test. If you want to sit and reach the toes, either if any disturbance which occur at the hip area, it can be hip flexor, it can be gluteus maximus, or even the erector spinae, if the length is getting restricted, there are more chances the person's flexibility can get affected. That's what they had explained here. So this flexibility has existed, and restriction of the motion at one segment also may result in the hypermobility of the unrestricted segments. In the sense, if our lumbar area, the back axis are so lax, then the hyperflexibility occurs, that also can create lower back pain. So if a problem occurs in the posterior aspect, that is erector spinae, or over the hip flexor, that is what we call as lower cross syndrome. If any muscles are getting tight either on the erector spinae or hip flexor, there are more chances that time also we can get the low back pain. That's what they are explained here. And yeah, it is also somewhat similar to the scapulohumeral rhythm. So in the next slides, we'll be explaining about the further movements. So for right now, this is more than enough. If you have any doubts, you can clarify. Thank you.